Thank you. Hi. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
It's great to see people back in the office. This is actually fantastic. I think it's our kind of our best turnout since that plague thing, wherever it was, COVID. It's been around. So, and to everybody online, I'll try and keep waving to you. Hello. Yeah. So welcome to our next session of Qabc, which is going to be about what an API is, how it works in the real world. And have like a little workshop around that. Then we've got our guest speaker, Paul, who's going to talk about a bit like Postman, how you can test APIs using Postman. So we've actually got a really, really good session up today. Please work.
You want me to come and spacebar?
I'll be fine. So if I do that, I click on click here. Oh. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Back in the room. So as per usual, we have a code of conduct. So all these sessions are always safe spaces to be in. It's always and always has been a free event. We'll never charge you. If I try and it's time to do one, but you know, volunteer. Everyone is always welcome, regardless of your background, don't care. Everyone is always welcome to Qabc. Please be respectful to others. If they have an opinion about testing, listen. Please feel free to respond, but again, be a bit diplomatic about it. If you think someone's been out of turn or said something that's quite offensive, it's not quite right, please report this to myself, to Gabby, Ken, or myself. And if you do break any of these rules, unfortunately, you will be banned from future events. So please be on your best behavior. But as soon as recording, maybe after that, that'll be fine. Does that wait? No, wrong way. I want to say a big thank you to Searchability and Gabby for providing beers, cokes, cakes, and pizzas for this evening. So thank you very much. Cheers, Gabby. If you're online, sorry. Click. So for those who don't know who I am, I'll give myself a quick introduction. I am Chris Forsyth. I am Agile QA Test Engineer. I've never had a company called Rail Diary. So yeah, I started here at Computer Love as a foundation Agile QA. And then soon after that, became co-founder of what you are here today is QABC, QA Beginners Club. And then I went on to Music Magpie as a QA tester. So wasn't bad there. And then left there, then where I am now at Rail Diary. And yeah, as the only QA test person there in the whole company. And it's fun. So without further ado, what is an API? What's API? So it's a kind of application program interface. Which is I'll do the whole deal. So it's a set of routines, protocols, and tools for building software applications. Basically, an API specify how software components should interact. So basically, how they talk to each other. When you send off a message, what is it you get back? Believe it or not, this isn't applied into the software world, it applies into the real world, which some of you in a few minutes will be APIs. Great. So an API is a software that really allows two applications to talk to each other. In other words, an API is a messenger that delivers your request to provider, that's your request from it, then delivers response back to you. So if you said hello to someone, then you say hello back. If not, just be rude. So how does an API work? So I'm going to use a real life example. So you go into a restaurant, you speak to a waiter, you are the customer, you're sitting at your table with a menu, and you choose an order. And this waiter takes the order, goes to the kitchen, provides this information to the chef to fill your order. So in sort of software terms, the chef is like the link to communicate your order to the kitchen, to the chef, and then deliver your food back to you at your table. This is where a waiter or an API enters the picture. That's what a waiter is in the real world. Example is an API. They take your request, they go to the chef kitchen, the chef then takes that information, and the waiter then brings it back to you, and hopefully they'll have the right order But I think quite happily we can all say we've been there, gone, this is not what I ordered. Fortunately, bad example, any previous waiters here? Thank Christ now, they're not doing their jobs right. So, give me 1 second, I shall let people in. Admit, there we go. Excuse me. Click. So this is one of the best quotes I had ever seen about being an API. Genuine quote as well. It's like, yeah, I'm having that. And I did. So real life APIs in the real world. So the train line, you request times in a station. And when you click on search, then you get your results back in real time. What stations are going from, what times are available. Argos. Hello. If you got your mic up, could you turn off, please? Sanjana, looking at you. Thank you. Argos, checking stock availability. You put a number. The API request will then go off. Check its database, come back. Then you might get something like it's in stock, or how many are in stock, or if it's out of stock. That's an API request. Online takeaway, Deliveroo, Just Eat, Uber Eats. You search for a restaurant in a certain area. We'll bring you back a list within that criteria. What restaurants are available, what food's available. That all again, API requests. Again, doing the last one is Rightmove. You put your criteria in. I want to say Manchester, radius of such and such, this kind of area. You click on search. It might take a minute or so. Then you get our research apps with all the criteria of what you search for. Again, that is API. You go to an API. I want this. Go fetch me data. Search database. Back it comes. Does that make sense to everyone what an API is? Believe it or not, it's not just in the software world. It is in the real world. We are all APIs. Is it okay? Want to just come up here and just say yes or no?
Yes.
Actually, I assume that was a yes. Boom. Yeah, I'll go that with a yes. So, yeah, oops. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Paul, who is automation test lead at Gear for Music, and is going to go through us about how to test APIs. So, thank you very much. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. So my name's Paul. I'm an automation test lead at Gear for Music. I've been testing since 2012. So there's some, feel free to add me on those social media links. Probably the best one is probably LinkedIn. But I'll give a brief introduction about who I am and what I've done before we do that. So I don't normally do this slide in the UK because obviously everybody knows Liverpool, but I've seen that we've got people on the Zoom call who are outside the UK. So I'm from Liverpool, the northwest of England. It's about 4 or 5 hours drive from London. And it's where the Beatles have gone. Most successful music app of all time. Last time I checked, 178 million records sold. So I got my start in testing in 2012. I was a music student and I had the opportunity to do like a work placement for THQ in Wellington. They're known for kind of doing the Warhammer games. And once I finished university, I applied for a job at Sony. Fortunately, Sony is also based in Liverpool. So I got a job there, starting on night shift, and I was there for about 2 years. So here are some of the titles that I've worked on, mostly focusing on the Little Big Planet franchise. And those 3 games have already been released, so it's mostly focusing on supporting them post-release, so like downloadable content. A Marvel film will come out and be like, oh, we've got a Spider-Man costume for this character. Does it look okay? Does it click through backgrounds? Can you share it and stuff like that? Did that for 2 years, and then the game I was working on, these games got canned. Little Big Planet 3 came out, and rather than wait around to see if it got moved onto that team, I decided to see what's on the job market for the current skills I learned at Sony, and the rest is history, really. So I'm currently working at Gear for Music right now. I've been working there for about 3 years, and we sell a variety of musical instruments. We have our own brand stuff, our own brand Gear for Music.
Yep, keep going.
Yeah, we have our own brand Gear for Music stuff, which is kind of like our entry level or beginner friendly, as well as we have our more kind of more professional brands or more professional users like Sub-Zero, Red Sub, and of course we sell other musical instruments for more popular brands like Yamaha, Fender, Gibson, etc. And we've also been acquiring brands, so we recently acquired Premier Drums, even bass amplifiers, And we very recently acquired AV, which is some sort of audiovisual. Chris, I've lost focus. Okay, doesn't matter. So we are one of the few businesses that seem to really have picked up business during lockdown, and I'm like a prime example of that. So before lockdown, I had 4 guitars. Now I've got 23. so I've been saving a lot of money on trade fairs, and as you just sat in your house a lot of people probably thought the same thing, like, oh, I've always wanted to learn violin, I've always wanted to learn piano, I've always wanted to learn guitar. Here we are. So our sales increased by 80%, and there's a link there, and there's also a BBC article as well. So here's how we work at Qabc Music. So we work in this concept of squads. So we've currently got 6, I believe we've got 7 now, but at the time we got 6. So each squad consists of about a couple of devs, so between 3 and 5 devs, and that ranges from junior devs, and they have 1 engineering lead. We have 1 quality engineer, which is what we call testers at Qabc Music. We also have 1 project manager and business analyst per squad, and each squad will work on a specific thing. So let's say 1 squad will work on an Apple Pay integration, 1 squad will work on warehouse management applications, and another squad will work on courier integrations or stuff like that. So one of the questions that gets asked by beginners is, why do we need to even test at the API when we can just test at the UI? And I guess the short answer to that is we want to find bugs as soon as possible in the software development lifecycle. And why is that? Well, if you find a bug as early as possible, it's cheaper to fix. And it also as well, you could have information that's in the API that isn't visible on the front end yet. So an example of this would be when I first started Qabc Music, we were rebuilding the entire returns platform. So if you bought a guitar and the wrong guitar was arrived at your door, returning that back to Qabc Music and getting a refund was a very manual process. You have to phone up customer services, they would have to sort out courier, and then the rest. But right now, when I was at Qabc Music when I first started, we built a REST API, and then that will tag in later to an area on the website for the customer to return the item themselves with little impact on customer services. So an example of that, so the developers designed the API. So first of all, they wrote some like JSON schemes to be like, here's what we want the API to look like. Right then and there, I could test, and I did. So you can look at a bunch of API endpoints and be like, hang on, for this endpoint, you've called it ID, and on this other endpoint, you've called it, something else. And then right then, you found a bug, you found an inconsistency. Same as if you're designing something on the front end, you have like a mock-up, you can test that. You can be like, well, that button's green, but everywhere else is orange. So why wait for that to be built when you can test early? So testing APIs is the prime example of that. So here's something that I wish someone told me when I first started. So I got so bogged down about like tools and what language to learn. It seemed like when I wanted to learn like browser automation, it seemed everybody was talking about, oh, you got to learn Java. All the jobs out there are Java. Oh no, what about this cool language, JavaScript's really picking up. And I was constantly chopping and changing between languages and tools. And I wish someone just told me back then, it doesn't matter. Just pick any tool, because a lot of the concepts that you learn in these API testing tools are transferable. Same with languages, you just got to learn the syntax, and just sort of all the concepts are the same. Creating variables, doing loops, creating conditions, classes, all the same. It doesn't matter that much. You just need to pick something and stick with it and create something. So although I'm going to be talking about Postman, the concepts around testing an API aren't Postman specific. They can be applied to kind of any tool, even if you're just writing, if you're not using like any kind of tool of the UI, if you're just writing code. So first of all, what is Postman? Postman is a collaboration platform for API development. So when I first started using Postman, it was a very simple tool. It was just a simple REST client to send requests, and you have to purchase this add-on in order to write automated tests. But it's now kind of grown into this much bigger tool where you can monitor your API, you can write API documentation, and many, many more. So most people, you'd be surprised how most people don't actually know that Postman can do that, because everywhere I've worked, people say, yeah, we use Postman, and they're just using it to hit endpoints, look at the response and go, yeah, we tested our API, that's fine. Most people don't know that you can write an entire automated test suite in Postman, and you can have it running in your build pipeline. So I've talked about Postman and API, so let's have some kind of real world, well, not real world, some fake examples. So let's say we work for a fake business, And fake business has an API endpoint called people, as we can see there. And that is a GET request. So the GET request will return us some information on the people that work or used to work at our fake business. So by default, it will return 10 to 20 employees, regardless of whether they're employed or not. But the developers have created a query parameter called page, because instead of just returning all the thousands of employees, past and present, which would result in a slow response, they've kind of paginated it. So you pass in a page query parameter at the end of the URL. So if you see at the bottom, we've got page equals 2. So that will return us the next set of 20 results. So an example of writing tests in Postman. So the syntax is very similar to, I guess, writing traditional mocker tests, really. So again, just because Postman writes it this way, it doesn't mean you're bogged down by Postman. It's kind of very standard with Node.js. And it's also using an assertion library called Chai, which is widely used in JavaScript as well. And I've shown 2 examples of writing tests in Postman. The one at the top is kind of like the modern way, and the one at the bottom is just not using something called an arrow function. I'm showing that just in case if you Google things, you might look at it and be like, ah, that's different, but they're both doing the same thing. So the first API test that I normally write is checking the status code. So status code would be, I'm sure you've been on the website where you type in the product and then all of a sudden, boom, 404 comes up. That is your status code for saying you couldn't find what you were looking for. So the first test we do for a successful request is making sure that we get a 200 response back. And here's how we do that in Postman. So we've got the name of our test there, which is HTTP status code 200 is returned. And the actual assertion on line 3 is that pm.expect. And then we've got on our first pair of brackets, the response code, and we want it to equal 200. And we can see at the bottom how that looks in Postman with a green path next to it. And of course, you should never, ever trust a test that you've never seen fail. That has bit me in the bum many times. I said a bad word then. So of course, you always have to force your test to fail. So before we were conferring that the status code back from our API response to be 200, I've forced it to say 500, and of course that's failed. And we can see that at the bottom, you say assertion error, expected 200 to equal 500. And then sometimes you may think that the failure message from Chai isn't really that great. So you can pass in custom failure messages there by just adding a comma and then a string within that first pair of brackets. So we could also slightly improve the readability of our status code test by utilizing variables. So if you remember in the previous slide, I had pm.expect, pm.response.code. And sometimes you might want to not do that and just have one word status code. So I have readability above everything when I write tests. So you can see in that first example there that the pm expects status codes to equal 200 just reads a lot nicer, in my opinion. And of course, with writing code, there are so many ways of doing the same thing. You can see an example at the bottom where we are writing that test in a slightly different way. So here's another test that we can do for that people endpoint. So worst case scenario, we get no results returned. There's no people. So we can test that. So we can ignore that test at the top because that's our status code. And we are expecting our response body to have a length of at least 1. So that means we're expecting at least 1 person object to be returned from that response body. So here's a little secret. The at, have, and a keywords don't do anything. So at first, that kind of bogs people down. When you first write and test, like, I've got to put all these dots and after all these words. Yeah, you don't even need that. So the test at the bottom does the exact same thing. But again, readability above everything, in my opinion. So that's why having that to have a length of just reads nicer. But you don't actually need that. So yeah, as I said, my number 1 rule, we're making automated API tests to make them as readable as possible to non-techies. So again, instead of utilizing a variable in that test, like saying expect the body to have a length of at least 1, you could write it that nasty way at the bottom by putting that pm.response.json. But to me, that's just not readable. And of course, if you're writing several tests that are testing things in the body, you're going to have to write pm.response.json, those 3 words all the time. And I'd rather not write that. I'd rather just create a variable and then just use 1 word to reference that. And of course, you've got to test that. You've got to test the test and check that it fails. So before we said it, we expected to have at least one thing in that response. So I've put in 5,000 there. And of course that fails because we said on a few slides ago, by default, we're returning the first 20 results. So you can see that error message in Postman there, where it says expected array 20 to have a length of at least 5,000, but we got 20. So more about, here's another request then, or the same request with a different query parameter. So yeah, as you can imagine, the endpoint could send a lot of people. So the developers in this fake scenario, they added several filters. So we could kind of filter the results returned. Like you said, there's like, it could be thousands of current or past employees. While the filters being employed equals true or false. And there's an example there. You can see the first query parameter is employed and that equals true. And you can see an example of that on the right whereas I think before there was 4 or 5 results returned, now there's 3 because we've filtered them down. We're only showing employees that are currently employed, as we can see by that property there called actively employed, and the value is true. But of course, you can pass in multiple query parameters. So you have to prefix your query parameters with a question mark, but you only need to do that once. And then if you just need to put an ampersand in between each query parameter. Again, as you can see at the bottom, we're saying page 1, and we only want to see employees that are employed. So one way of writing that test to confirm that every person returned in that response is employed, you could write it like this. So in my opinion, these kind of array methods is possibly the most complex thing I do in my job. So I don't really expect you guys to understand all of that yet, but I just wanted to put that in because array methods was like mind-blowing for me. As soon as I learned how to do that, it was a game changer. So I just wanted to put that there to put that in people's minds, and I've linked 2 really good tutorials. One of them actually shows how using the every array method, like in like a nice animation. Right then. So I assume people here remember Pokemon, and no one looks super, super young. And so people like, don't know. So Pokemon was a franchise in the 90s that was absolutely massive. And it involved, I guess, catching these little creatures into these little pocket balls. And I guess the aim was to kind of catch them all. And there were all these different types. They have electric types, fire types, water types, etc. Why am I talking about this? Well, here's a scenario. So on the right here, we've got Professor Oak. He is the Pokemon professor. He's in the process of creating a digital encyclopedia called the Pokedex, which is that red thing on the bottom right. So the Pokedex contains information on all 800 Pokemon, or 800 plus Pokemon. He's just finished creating the Pokemon API, and he wants us to test it. So he wants to have confidence that the API works as intended before he starts using his hard-earned Pokédollars for the manufacturing of the Pokédex devices. But thankfully, he has published very detailed documentation on his API, which is at that link. So now it's time to do a live demo. Chris. Yep. Oops.
As if by magic.
Here we are. Okay, so I assume that the people on Zoom can see Postman there. So you could do this practical, you can do this now, or feel free to do this in the future because this video will be available on YouTube. So Postman's got this concept of workspaces. So you could have a workspace for your team where you can share your API documentation, or you could have workspaces for yourself if you're like if you're a developer that's working on several APIs privately, you could separate that by having separate workspaces. So I've created that example there about the Pokemon API. I've created an example workspace here. So if you open Postman, and make sure you're updated to the latest version, of course. And at the top, you want to search for QABC. And you will see this thing here, QABC, 3rd of November, Poke API. So if you click that, it'll eventually open this here. You can see this little public workspace, hence the little globe icon. And what you can do is you can click the little ellipse next to QABC Pokemon API, and then you can create a fork. So that just kind of creates a clone of this API collection that I've created. And then you've kind of got your own copy. So then you can do what you want with it. You can write some example API tests based on the slides that we've been through so far, without kind of messing up what I've already done. When you click create fork, you can give the fork a label or like a name. So my nickname is Faz, so I'm just gonna type that in. And then you select a workspace of where you want it to go to. By default, you would have one. If this is your first time using Postman, it's called My Workspace. And it's a private workspace, which you can see by this little one person icon. If it was a team workspace, which multiple people can collaborate and write tests together, it would have multiple people. And I assume if it was a public one, it would have that globe. So I'm going to click My Workspace. I'll leave that ticked for now for collection. So that should take us to My Workspace. Yeah, and there we go. There's the fork, as you can see, because there's fast next to it. So I'll expand that. So like I said, people on Zoom, feel free to fork the Qabc collection and write some tests. So a little task for you. So I've written out some empty folders here. So feel free to do what you want in these two. So let's just look at the Pokemon endpoint. So if you remember in the previous slide for our fake business, we had a people endpoint, which returned all the people. But it limited to 20 by default. Let's just hit this Pokemon API. As you can see, there's the URL for it. I've got all that hard coded for now. And I've just got one example test. What about two example tests? The first test is just making sure that we've got a status code of 200. And then we're making sure that the first Pokemon returned is Bulbasaur, which is a little grass thing with it's like a little frog with a little mushroom on its back. It's hard to explain. If you're a 90s kid, you'll understand. Right, so I'm going to send that request and hopefully the demo gods are on my side and this works. Lovely. As you can see, we have got a huge response body with loads and loads of information on Pokemon, very similar to our people endpoint. And by default, let's see if we can find it. Yeah, by default, we have it is set to a limit of 20, just like our people endpoint. How about that? So I've written two example tests here. So obviously the status code is 200. Come on, mouse, work. And that's green. And we're writing a test here to expect the first Pokemon in our results array to have the name, Bulbasaur. So let's just manually confirm that. So here's our results array. And then the first object in there, let's go into that. And then there's our name property, and there's Bulbasaur. So again, let's force that to fail. Something that doesn't exist, so I'm just going to put my name there, and that should fail. Yeah, of course, that's failed because Paul is not a Pokemon. And you can see by the error message there, we expected this object, name, URL, blah, 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 to have property name of Paul, but got Bulbasaur. So here's an example of where the error message isn't really that super obvious. So you could utilize what I've shown in the previous slide around custom error messages there. There's a perfect example for that. So I'm just going to undo that. And let's confirm that's working again before I move on. Yeah, so let's look at that response body. So there's quite a few things we can test there. So in my opinion, I've tested the most vital ones with confirming that we're getting the 200 status code and we're confirming that the first Pokemon returned is Bulbasaur. So normally testing the order of things in the API isn't really, it's kind of frowned upon really because it shouldn't really matter the order of the data. But in this case, it's kind of sorted by the ID. And since I know the product being Pokemon, I know that for a fact that the first one returned is Bulbasaur, so that's why I've tested that way. So you could have a little assignment when you do this in your own time, that the test that we had before where we wanted to confirm at least one result was returned. You could do that. There's an array. You want to confirm that the array is not empty. You want to confirm that the array has a length greater than 1. You can write that there. Next one. Come on. So with the Pokemon API, you can pass in a name parameter at the end. So I call these path parameters. I feel like they have other names as well, but before we talk about query parameters, which go at the end of the URL, but prefixed with a question mark. And this is part of the URL before all your query parameters. Cubone is a Pokemon. It's one of my favorite ones. So I'm just using that as an example. And that should return us, that should return us what's called information on Cubone. So let's run that and see what happens. Oh no, something happened there. So what I've done here is, so if you compare the URL of the first request, I've got the URL hard-coded there, but in this one, I've set it to a variable. So why would we do that? So let's say we work for this Pokemon company and they have like kind of a local version of the API, like you download the API, it's only on your machine, nobody else can access it. That would have a URL like localhost or something like that. And then let's say they want to put it on a website or like a URL that other testers could hit, and that can no longer be on localhost. It's got to like live somewhere. So you have to imagine, if you've got a load of tests that are hard coded to a localhost, you've got to change all those URLs and it's paying. And the same if you want to test this thing in production. So this is why we just have a variable called URL. And then we have environments in Postman in the top right. So we have an environment called local. We have an environment called, I guess, development, an environment called production. So there's no environments that exist in a minute. So I'm just going to create one and I'll show you how that works. So
where's that URL variable? Is it a standard thing built into Postman? Or is it...
No, we're going to create it. I've created it before because I intended this to fail. Yeah, so first of all, I'm going to copy this hard-coded URL. And there are several ways to create an environment. I'll do it here. And let's just say, yeah, we're testing production. So, pressure's on, can't spell, production. And our variable name is URL, so it has to be URL. And we have initial and current value. So the difference between these two things is the initial value is the thing that gets shared. So let's say you and I work for the Pokemon company and we both want to test this API together. If I put the URL here, once you have access to this collection, let's say if I made this collection a TV collection, right now it's only on mine, you would have access to that value. You would be able to see what the URL is. But anything in the current URL is just on my machine. So let's say for some reason I had my username or password there as variables in Postman. I obviously wouldn't want to share that. So this initial value field would be blank, but the current value field will be populated. So I've created that environment, so save it. And then I'm going to select it from the top right, production. Right, let's hit the API endpoint and hopefully it works. We can confirm that the URL exists by mousing over it and we can see that there's initial and a current value variable exists. And it says at the bottom scope environment because there's different kinds of variables with different scopes, which I don't have time to go into. But let's very quickly hit that because I'm conscious of time. Right, so here we go. We've got, so let's try and make that a little bit bigger. It's the best we can do. So yeah, here we got information specifically on the one Pokemon Cubone. So before, if we didn't have Cubone, it's like, here's all the information on all the Pokemon. Now that we've passed in one specific person or one specific Pokemon, we've got all information on that one Pokemon. And let's see what tests I've written. Of course, status code. God, this window is tiny. Yeah, and then we've got to look in the response and confirm that the Pokemon name was what we expect, which is Cubone. That's what we passed in. If we're receiving the wrong Pokemon, that's wrong. So to put that in context, at that people endpoint, let's say if you want to search for a specific person and you get another person's details, that's pretty bad. And then I know for the fact that Cubone has an ID in the Pokedex of 104. Let's confirm that. So body to have property name. So first of all, let's just confirm that. There should be a property called name at the most top level. How big is this? Okay, is this response massive? Okay, you'll have to trust me that this response is huge. Yeah, so there's a property there called name. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, there's a property name there called name, and it has the value of Cubone, which is correct, and it has the ID of 104. So again, let's just confirm that that's will fail gracefully. Let's just put a ton of Z's at the end, send that request. Sleepy Cubone, indeed. Yeah, so you can see there, we expected blah, blah, blah to have property name, which it does, but the value is expected as Cubone with loads of Z's. But what we got instead was Cubone with no Z's. So I wish I learned how to do that in Postman years ago. because what I would do is I would write a test to be like, right, does our response body have does it have the property name? And then I write another test to confirm the actual value of that. Whereas this to have property kind of does several tests in one. It confirms that the name property exists in our response. If it's not there, it will fail nicely and be like, that property doesn't exist. And it also checks that if the value is correct as well, and also its type. So for his perfect example, let me just get rid of the Z's in Cubone.
What's you doing that? Do you have to wrap it in a function?
Which this expect thing?
It's 2 parameters.
Yeah. So it takes 2 parameters. Yeah. So Postman has intelligence. So when you start, as soon as you open a pair of brackets, a little pop-up will come up to be like, the first parameter will be this thing, and the second parameter will be this other thing. So it'll tell you what to fill it in.
To convert to our property, that's just like comment their version of comment basically.
Just
the name or something as well.
Yeah, so it's like, I guess, kind of like a field in the response body. So the first parameter is like, here's like the field that's in the response body. So for example, there's an ID field there. So if I purposely fail that, this IDs with several Zs obviously doesn't exist.
So you could change that to type instead.
Sorry, what?
So instead of
sorry, yeah. So assuming there's a property in this response body called type and it has the value of rock, or in this case it'll be brown because Cubone's a brown type. So that would pass. Well, in that example it would fail because Cubone's not a rock type, it's a ground type. So so the first 2 parameters in our to how property would be, here's the field and the second one is the value. So as I said, it also does a match on the type of value. So let me just quickly send that. So that's all passing because 104 as a number is the correct type. But if I put that in a string, where's the shift? Okay, where is your quotation marks? Right, well, hopefully this will fail. Lovely, right. So it says it expects to have a property ID, which it does, but it expects it to have the value of 104 as a string, so in quotation marks. But what we got was 104 as a number. So we've got several tests in one there. It's checking the property and it's checking the value and the value's type of like whether it's a string or whether it's a number. How are we on time, Chris? Am I going over?
Yeah, you got a few more.
Right, a few more minutes. So we've got another similar endpoint, but instead of passing in the name, we can pass in an ID. So as we saw before, Cubone has the ID of 104. So if we pass in, so Pokemon/104, it should return us the exact same information. But as you can see there, instead of using a number, I'm using a variable. So we mouse over that. So this one is called a collection variable. So these only exist in the collection. So if we had other API endpoints that wanted to kind of use environment variables which live here, so everything in this workspace could use those variables, whereas these variables that I create in a collection level only exist here. So for example of that, I'm setting these there. So this is called like a pre-request script. So this is kind of like Postman, before you hit this request, do these things. So if anyone's kind of got, I don't know, Mocha experience with JavaScript, it's like kind of like a before hook. So I also treat this as like, before you walk in the door, wash your hands or sanitize your hands. It's kind of like that. So what I'm doing before this request is sent, I'm creating a collection variable called Pokemon ID, and it has the value 104. And I'm also creating a variable called Pokemon name, which has the value Cubone. So
is that variable only usable within that particular folder in the entire collection structure?
It's only used so it goes up. So it's using this entire like collection. So not this one folder. It's used here, like this entire collection like that. Hopefully that makes sense to people on Zoom. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse moving.
You only view it when you go into this folder location and go on the pre-request script.
Yeah, well, I'll show you. So normally you can view your environment variables by clicking this little eye and then seeing all your variables. So this is something that we had in my previous role, and as well as Gave Music, we would run this massive API test suite, hundreds of requests, and it'll be setting variables as it goes along. If something goes wrong, you click the eye and you've got hundreds of variables to go through to be like, oh my God, this is so messy. I only want to see certain specific things. So what we did is we only put the important stuff in environment variables. So like URL, kind of like access tokens. So, like logging in basically. And then anything that's kind of like used for the tests or used for the requests, I separate them away in collection variables. So let me send this request first and I'll show you how you can view those variables. So of course, this is all passing because I've obviously tested this before. If I click like the actual collection itself, which is the parentmost folder, you can see here variables, and we can see the variables that we have created. Can I get that out of the way? So we've got more screen space. Yeah. So here we can see our collection variables that we created. We've got one called Pokemon name and Pokemon ID, which we've set ourselves just in that request. So before I hit that request, those values didn't exist. They were empty, unless I've ran the request before and then they get saved. So Postman just remembers that I've kind of like, oh, you've ran this before. I know what variables you want to use for this collection. But if I created another collection, like another folder here, it wouldn't have any knowledge of this. These variables, it's called scope. You just wouldn't know that those exist. So you can also use those variables as part of your test as well. And then after this, I'll wrap it up. Let's send that request. Let's look at some tests. Custom testing, the status code, as we all know. Let me try and move that sidebar out of the way so we've got more. It's well better. Okay, so we've got a test. It returns the expected name and Pokemon ID, exact same test as we had before. But beforehand, we hard-coded the Pokemon name, which is Qabc, and its ID 104. But now we're pointing it at the variable. So our to-have property, the first parameter in that is name, which is that's the field we're looking for in the response body. But we expect its value to equal this Pokemon name, which is what we set in our pre-request script, which is Qabc. So what does that mean? That means I can actually change it to whatever I want. So let me think. Oh, no. Thanks, Amy. Right, I don't know what the number of Jigglypuff is, so we can find that. Let me get the sidebar back. Well, we're passing in the ID as part of this. So for example, if I go to this request here, type in Jigglypuff, send. Obviously that's failing because we're expecting to see Qabc. There should be an ID property here, so we can do. There we go, 39 apparently. So if I pass it, if I change that to 39. So Pokemon ID 39 and the name Jigglypuff. Okay, I don't know why that's failing. Pokemon name. Well, that's awkward. Did I save the change? Save. No, it's still expecting that. Okay, so Jigglypuff. Oh, we expected 39. Huh. I don't know why that's failing, and that's pretty awkward. But anyway, thanks, Amy. So we got other examples there, which obviously I don't have time to go through. There's other endpoints like /types. And like before, if you hit the /types endpoint without passing anything in, it's going to return you all the Pokemon types that exist. So fire, water, fighting, rock, ground, etc., etc. And like before, you can do type /rock, and that will return you information on rock Pokemon. And each type has an ID assigned to it. And I've also included some example tests there, but I've put don't cheat because I would like you to kind of explore testing the API yourself. Just look at the response body, think what is important here, what would I testify worked for the Pokemon company? And then once you feel like you've got a grasp for that, feel free to look at the tests that I've written here, which I'm not going to show you. And feel free to like send me like some tests on LinkedIn to be like, is this a good test, or here's my interpretation of writing a test that's different to yours. What do you think? My inbox is always open on LinkedIn. I think I'm going to end it because I'm well over time.
Thank you very much. Questions before this evening? Excellent.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was taking this off before.
It's all right.
If someone had no idea where to start with writing the test, was there somewhere in Postman that they could see snippets, for example?
Okay, so for the people on Zoom, if they can't hear, Chris asked if someone doesn't know where to start with API testing. So there is this little bottom right section in Postman called Bootcamp. So you can kind of do, I believe there are kind of inbuilt lessons within Postman. So if you want to learn how to write tests, you can follow that. There's also a ton of material online. You can go to Test Automation University. There's a great course by Amber Rees and Beth Marshall. I believe Beth Marshall is attending this right now on Zoom. Yeah, so those two courses are great. There's also a guy on YouTube called Valentine, I can't remember his last name, Desfeld, something like that. He's got, no. So he's got great videos on API testing, loads and loads. Those two resources are great. Test Automation University, built-in bootcamp, and YouTube as well. Any other questions or do you need to wrap up? Right. Thanks, everyone. Oh, there we go. Despo, Valentine Despo. Thanks, Beth. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I'm also on the QABC Slack channel. Yeah, so you can feel free to DM me or maybe we can share tests with each other. Maybe?
Yeah, why not?
Cool. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so thank you very much for coming along this evening. Hope you found that very informative. Yeah, so hopefully, I think our next event will probably be the 1st of December or the 7th of December, but yeah, keep an eye on the meetup. So yeah, again, thank you everybody who's attended this evening. Thank you so much to Paul. Thank you very much. Thank you very much again to Searchability and Qabc for providing beers and pizzas, cakes, and whatnot. And thank you to everybody online. So we haven't forgotten about you. We're all good. So yeah. So
thank you.
Sessions have been recorded. We'll go to our YouTube channel. So if you did miss anything, I'll probably snip out my little ups. So yeah, we'll have to go through that pain again. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, and have a good evening. Thank you. Cheers.
Have a good evening. Bye. 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 Bye.
So if those who are here, you would have put any notes up, anything like this evening, anything you'd like to see. So stop to continue. What you thought this evening, any feedback we get from yourselves, we can make ourselves better. So if you have any thoughts or anything, please. There's some post-it pens over there. So yeah, please stick them up. If you've got time or you've got trains to catch, then you've got to go. Yeah. Good to speak to you.
It could be pretty close to Black Friday, so I'm happy to have that conversation.
Okay, that's fine. Cool. Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Bye. Bye. Thanks.
Thank you very much.